Hello, my dear friends, and welcome to this, a Johnny Vedmore read-through of my article, which is going to cause more trouble. I hope it's going to cause trouble. I like writing articles that cause trouble, one of my things. This one, Schwab and Thiel, Nuclear Apartheid. Yes, I'd already done a little bit of research into Klaus Schwab. If anybody hadn't noticed, I was the one who revealed who his father was, how he worked for a model Nazi company called Escher Weiss during the war. And it was central to the atomic bomb program. He didn't only work for the company, he managed the Ravensburg factory where they were making large turbines, casings for atomic bombs and stuff like that for the Nazis. And that were being used to, of course, enrich uranium up in the Scandinavian areas, which I mean, there's been a lot written about those things. And afterwards, what happened? Well, everybody scattered. The nuclear scientists scattered. They all got picked up by different things. The company, after a while, Schulze Weiss would merge. Two companies, Schulze and Escher Weiss, would merge in around 1966 to 1967. The decision was officially made to merge these companies, and these companies had both worked on different parts of the Nazi atomic bomb program. And in merging these companies, they needed someone savvy, someone who knew things. Now, Eugen Schwab, Klaus Schwab's father, had previously been the general manager of the Ravensburg branch, and Peter Schmidheiny, one of the heads of Schulze Weiss, called a young Klaus Schwab in 1967 and said, "Hey, you just graduated from Harvard. How about you come and help lead our merger and our company, Schulze Escher Weiss," including, of course, merging Brown Boveri too, and that we will eventually, I suppose this is how he spoke. He probably spoke in this kind of Swiss accent, Peter Schmidheiny. And you can make this merger a success. But Schwab wasn't alone. He picked up some friends. This was 1967. In 1965, 1966, while he was at Harvard, he picked up a couple of mentors off a guy, some random guy called Henry Kissinger, who was running Kissinger's International Seminar leadership training program, where they could train up American-aligned nuclear leadership. I think a lot of it was atomic. It was about leaking atomic information around the place so there could be more nuclear powers, shore up the idea of mutually assured destruction that Herman Kahn had posited in On Thermonuclear War in 1961, and who became Schwab's mentors. But Herman Kahn was one of Schwab's mentors, the man behind nuclear theory. You just don't make one of the key figures, the grandfather of nuclear theory, of the current mad mutually assured destruction, the dynamic that sees that if everybody's got nukes, then people are likely to not fire nukes because they'll be instantly destroyed by everybody with nukes. So there's less likely. And they'd mapped out, they had been like, oh, it'll only destroy 60% of the world if we have a big Third World War nuclear, because after a while, all the nuclear capabilities to make new launches are gone. So you're left with what you're left with. And by that time, they were like, it's only 60%. This is Herman Kahn coming up with this. He was running out of the Hudson Institute. I think the Hudson Institute had kind of come about through the Rand Corporation as well. These were dark people who were working on the nuclear bomb program. Of course, Schwab gets given this mentor, Herman Kahn. It's not for any reason. It's not just random. You don't get given the grandfather of nuclear theory for no reason. It's because you're involved, because you're doing something. And in my first article, Schwab Family Values, I revealed that one of the things that Schwab went on to do was help to sell nuclear weapons technology to the apartheid South African regime while it was illegal against international law to do so when he went and worked for Schulze Escher Weiss. And this came out in 1991, 1992. The Swiss did a big review. They said, oh, look, all of these things happen, but everybody's forgiven now. And then Nelson Mandela. This was how everybody forgot. In South Africa, you speak with South Africans who are politically wise, and they'll tell you this as well. Oh, Nelson Mandela. Just wipe your mind. Wipe your mind. All of the nuclear apartheid went because we got this one figure. Oh, Nelson Mandela. Wishy, 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 washy. You know, Epstein and Maxwell and Clinton went to South Africa on their last journey in African Odyssey. And the last trip they made to South Africa to meet Nelson Mandela. Because Nelson Mandela had a queue of influential people who would pay big money to go and see him. So, I mean, oh, Nelson Mandela, let's just wipe your mind. Nuclear apartheid, who's thinking about nuclear bombs or apartheid? Look, the world's a beast now. Shut up. Shut up, you. There's more. There was more to that. I knew there was more to that at the time. When I was studying Schwab during this period, I just kept finding more and more. But I had to go on a mission. I had been asked by Whitney Webb to research Klaus Schwab's ancestry and see if I could find anything. See if I could find out who his mother and father really were. I was given 6 weeks and for Unlimited Hangout to do that. That's how Schwab Family Values came around. I went and I was in Chile. It was summer. It was beautiful. Just constantly researching, constantly in the archives, newspaper after newspaper, translating. They don't have copy and paste. You have to type the German words and the French words and translate them because I don't speak German. I learned a little bit because I was doing this. So going through all of these old archives, going back to the 1800s and trying to find Schwab. Trying to find where Schwab came from. And Schwab came from Schwabia, where the namesake, he was the namesake of the region, Oberschwabia. So, I mean, it was always going to be hard. But 5 weeks in, I found about Eugen Schwab, and then everything unraveled. Escher Weiss, their work on the Nazi atomic bomb program, all of the rest of things. Klaus Schwab doing the same as his father did. Repeating the same thing, selling the same company, illegally selling nuclear weapons technology to a racist, genocidal apartheid regime, just like Daddy did. Schwab's in it. Oh, Nelson Mandela! Don't forget about it all. They forgot they had to report Nelson Mandela come out. Everything's forgiven. Everything's forgiven. Now we've had Black Jesus. We don't have to remember anything. Do we? There's more happening. More than just Nelson Mandela. More than just Schwab and Kissinger. And this was, I mean, that period as well. I'm talking about with Nelson Mandela, with what happened with apartheid South Africa. That's also like the just around the same time as the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Soviet is collapsing. Soviet Union collapsing, and it's also around the same time the World Economic Forum becomes reformats itself and comes out as globalist. Oh, we're not just a European Management Forum; we're actually the World Economic Forum. Didn't we tell you? Ha ha! Set up by Klaus Schwab with the help of Herman Kahn, John Kenneth Galbraith, Otto von Habsburg, all of these big movers and shakers. And then behind the scenes was CIA, Henry Kissinger, a CIA-funded course that Schwab went through to be given these mentors, go back to do this stuff. And it was obviously a nuclear dynamic, and I knew there would be more to find. But I had to go on to the next bit. I had to go on to understand the formation of leadership courses, why Kissinger had made Kissinger's International Seminar, what that eventually became, how the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leader program was actually originally funded through a $1 million donation from the Dan David Foundation while Kissinger was on the board. So he was making Kissinger's International Seminar later on by making the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leader, or Forum for Young Global Leaders. Infamous program where the majority of our leaders come from. In Britain alone, like we say, major politicians, or just a few. David Cameron, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, Ed Miliband, Ed Balls, Yvette Cooper, Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss. All of these guys, Boris Johnson, why not? Keir Starmer, why not go through the training leadership mill that the CIA offers you? Why not go? Oh, Nelson Mandela, they just wipe your mind with Black Jesus anyway. It'd be fine. They'll bring another one out. They'll bring another. Next one will be like Chinese Jesus or something. I don't know, Mexican Jesus. I don't really care. Don't really care. But they're gonna wash our minds with a belief, this false belief that we've somehow reformed our societies. And so I was like, feel like there's more there. I spent a couple of years. Yeah, I mean, I did the Kissinger continuum, the unauthorized history of the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leader program. I wrote that. And then I wrote about Guido Goldman and the creation of the German Marshall Fund, because after Kissinger's International Seminar got shut down, Guido Goldman, who was Henry Kissinger's best friend and flatmate, they were bros. His father was, one of the founding fathers of modern Zionism and Israel, Nahum Goldman. So, like, a bigwig, pretty big. One of the founders of Israel, one of the four guys who are seen really as the most important to Israel existing today, who battled for it, who used every tactic to make it what he, in his own words, the global strategic military center of the world. Domination. That's what Israel was made for, to dominate the world. Dominate. In their own words, not mine. They're just the words of the founding fathers of Israel. That's all. Don't worry about it. Oh, Nelson Mandela. You might see I'm a little perky today. I'm a little bit pissed off because I got to read this article to you. And I've researched some bad shit, man. I've researched some bad shit, some real fucking dire shit, but nothing was as bad as this. There were parts of research in this where the parts of research in this didn't made me not want to be a writer anymore. Made me not want to do what I do. And I didn't expect to find quite what I found. You know, I knew I had to go back into the history. I had done a couple of news hounds where I'd done a couple of news hounds where I'd gone through Klaus Schwab's and history in the newspapers, just in the newspapers, a young Klaus Schwab going around America and a bit of the formation of the World Economic Forum. You know, I thought it would help if I kind of would. And I passed by a couple of things during that period where I knew, hey, there's something else here. Then recently, I went back in time and I said, as people know from my work, as I did with Klaus Schwab, what's the point? What's the point of researching Klaus Schwab? I won't know who he is still unless I research his family. If I work out what his life was like, what growing up was like, what his formative years were like, you know, unless I go through that, unless I understand who his father was and his mother was and his grandparents and where he come from and where his life, what his life was like, and all of the context I can fill in, I won't know anything anyway. And I felt the same about Peter Thiel. And people trying to convince me, they're saying, oh, you know, you should write more about Thiel. You should write more about Thiel. I mean, I'm I'm reticent. I don't know if that's the right word. I'm not eager to do directly write about Peter Thiel because everybody's writing about him. So I learned very early on that that's not my job. That's not my job. My job is to find the information that gives other people's writing context. I've got to find the information that no one else knows, that you're not allowed to know, that will actually make sense and give context to everything, and will make everybody say, hey, that makes sense why he's that way. That makes sense why he believes that. And also in doing this, what I discovered was again the backing up that this is a very small group of people. It's a very small club. It's a very small club. You're not in this club. You're not a member of this club. Okay. And Klaus, another Klaus, it was Klaus Schwab. And there's Klaus Thiel. And I wasn't, you know, I wasn't thinking Schwab when I started looking into Klaus Thiel. I wasn't thinking Schwab. I wasn't thinking about my work on the nuclear program. I wasn't thinking about that. I knew that Peter Thiel's father worked in a mine in South Africa, the same as Elon Musk, and I knew that he worked on that Peter Thiel's father, Klaus Thiel, worked on a uranium mine. And I thought to myself, well, you know, I'm gonna find a load of stuff, and it's probably some of it's gonna be indicative of Thiel's family and how they express. I don't care if you agree with it or not. So many similarities between how we end up living our life and our parents. Don't want to be the one running away from becoming daddy because what happens? What happens? Now, this was a difficult period. Now, I had context. So when I went to go and look into Peter Thiel's history, Peter Thiel's father's history, Klaus Thiel, I already had context. I already discovered suddenly I was in the same place I'd been researching before. I was hanging around in the same area. I've done a lot of research there. Just not only I'm doing surreptitiously, I'm doing Jack the Ripper research. Don't tell anyone. I'm about 7 years into that. 7 years. I've not told hardly anybody, a living soul, what I've discovered during that time, and I've discovered some stuff. And some of it included, like, spending time researching different areas of the world, including South Africa and the Transvaal. And I've done a lot of research. And this article, this one, Schwab and Thiel nuclear apartheid, it's been a difficult one, a real difficult one. Halfway through, I had to stop for a little bit and recompose myself. And I hope I've done it justice, the information justice. And I hope I've told the story in the right way, because I think there's a lot that isn't being told about this. I felt like, people say, "Oh, he worked in a mine, and the mine conditions were terrible." No one is rationalizing or working out what that means. No one. So we should. And in researching this, I found myself back in the same place and overlapping with Schwab and ending up following Schwab a little bit more and getting more context to how Schwab was involved with the American nuclear program. Directly involved, central to the American nuclear program. We're going to do it, people. I'm going to do it. I'm going to put on these glasses. Might have to clean them, to be honest. And we're going to do a Johnny Vedmore read through. Prepare yourself for this one, right? I'm sorry. I am. Okay. Okay. Here we are. Let me compose myself a little bit. We're at my Substack. I would normally be on Newspaste for this, and you can go and read this on Newspaste. You can go read this on Substack. You can read this on Patreon. Patreon and Substack got this on the 1st of October. So that's a couple of weeks early. And it is quite a big story to release this early. I normally have to release articles like, boom, here you go. Just as something happens, or it has to be come out and it has to be sudden and it has to be a surprise, because otherwise people prepare for it and hide information. So I very rarely put it out this early, but I have put it out. I put it out on Substack. It's on paid, as you see at the moment. It's for paid subscribers. It's had, I've got a small following over here. It's only about 1,100 at the moment, but it's a tight knit following. I thank you for your support and your help. I desperately need support and help if I want to continue doing this work. And to be perfectly honest, it's hard to want to continue doing this work. Sometimes it makes you so sad that it makes you depressed in the real world. You know, I had a hard time halfway through this. I had to get my head back together a little bit, because this is going to be horrible. So this is a story of how Peter Thiel's father and Klaus Schwab ensured that tens of thousands of black slaves and their family members were eaten to death by radiation. By me, Johnny Vedmore. As you see. In 1967, Peter Thiel's father, Klaus Thiel, was an expert in open pit mining. When Peter Thiel was still an infant, his father was recruited by the Apartheid South African regime to work on their clandestine nuclear weapons program. However, Klaus Thiel was not the only German named Klaus at this time who was working on the secretive South African plan to develop a nuclear weapon. A young Klaus Schwab was also doing business with the South African regime on behalf of the model Nazi company which his father once ran, Escher Weiss. In a previous article, Dr. Klaus Schwab, or How the CFR Taught Me to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, I revealed that the founder of the World Economic Forum had received CIA-funded training under the tutelage of Henry Kissinger. This article also reveals for the first time that the Rotary Club funded Schwab's involvement with the infamous Harvard Seminar, a course that functioned as a CIA leadership training program. The article also reveals Klaus Schwab's direct involvement with American nuclear scientists at University of California, Berkeley. During this period, UC Berkeley was central to the US nuclear arms race, and Schwab was in CIA training. Okay. If you want to read, this is the second of the articles. This is Dr. Klaus Schwab, or How the CFR Taught Me to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. Of course, the real Dr. Strangelove, as he's been described, Herman Cahn's down there in the corner, John Kenneth Galbraith, Henry Kissinger, and Klaus Schwab himself with his nice CIA banner on his head. These I've transferred these in Redux editions, and nearly all of my work will be available on Substack. I've not made any changes to the actual information. I've only just made grammatical changes, make it read better. But all of my modern article and all my work is being transferred over to Substack, along with some other platforms too. In one of the saddest and most psychologically scarring articles I have ever researched and written, I explore the truth behind Thiel and Schwab's involvement in a true crime against humanity. Be aware, some of what you're about to read could devastate the hardest of hearts. City of the Dead. Swakopmund had once been a hearty and relatively prosperous coastal town within German South Africa. During the First World War, the town was occupied by British soldiers. The Belfast Morning News of Friday the 19th of March 1915 produced an article subtitled Glance at the Operation in German Southwest Africa, which reported on the British forces' first impression of the town, stating, handicapped in every possible way by nature, by an abominable landing place, and by a site that is as sandy as the foreshore and the hinterland. The Germans, by dint of the energy and thoroughness of characteristic of them, have reared a town which in design and buildings easily surpasses anything of the same size in British South Africa. They made up their minds to create a port. They have done so, out of the worst possible material. In similar circumstances, we should have said the thing was not worthwhile, and we should have either left the place alone altogether, or else have dotted down enough corrugated iron shanties to carry on with it. But that is not the German way. They have built themselves solid buildings, government offices, warehouses, shops, and dwellings, which in such surrounding excites one's wonder and envy. When the British arrived in the German South African port, they were met with a ghost town of sorts. They marched through the empty streets, which were described as a veritable city of the dead in the latter article. Swakopmund had only been developed over the previous 2 decades. In 1899, the town got a telegraph line for the first time, and according to the German press, Cecil Rhodes himself had become interested in the area. The Sunderland Daily Echo and Shipping Gazette in February 1900 reported, according to the Berlin correspondent, Mr. Rhodes will probably go to German Southwest Africa in April. His visit being connected with the development of the Apartheid mines and the Anglo-German railway project from Fish Bay to Swakopmund in German Southwest to the Transvaal. Even though the Apartheid Mining and Railway Company was tied to the German government, they had initially received a special concession not to connect Swakopmund to the German railway line. Instead, they planned to build a railway line from Swakopmund to Port Alexander, which the Portuguese then held. Apartheid Mining had copper mines in the area, and in 1903 they agreed to join the Apartheid Railway at Kabib, where with the Swakopmund Windhoek Railway in the Windhoek Railway. The Southwest African Company joined with German financiers in a £1 million pound deal. Apartheid Mining and Railway Company would complete the train line, and in return, they'd receive mining rights. So that's 1903, £1 million in 1903. Amazing. The following year, there was a more serious conflict in the region. Natives were reported as besieging the local army garrison at Okhandja. This was the start of the Herero and Nama genocide. In January 1904, Samuel Maharero and Captain Hendrik Witbooi led their people in an uprising against their German colonial rulers. They killed more than 100 German settlers in Okhandja, and the retaliation by the Germans over the following 4 years was brutal. Here's some of the Herero people during the 1904 to 1908 genocide. That's from the VaticanNews.va. What a strange one. Nama and Herero natives were systematically starved, dehydrated, and imprisoned in concentration camps, with between 34,000 and 110,000 people murdered in what was the first genocide of the 20th century. By November 1906, the Apartheid Mine and Railway Company opened a new train line from Swakopmund to Tsumeb. Zumeb, I suppose it'd be pronounced. The project had gone over budget, but soon the profits went through the roof. Within the first 200 tons of ore to be shipped to Europe, copper and lead were found to be in abundance. Out of the first 100 tons of ore which was smelted in Europe, 10 to 16% was copper and 30 to 50% was lead. When the British Army arrived in the Swakopmund Ghost Town during World War One, they were also capturing strategically important mines while pushing out the perpetrators of the Nama and Herero genocide. Production at the facility had increased markedly by this time. The mines Zumeb, Gizongati, and Sinclair had become major sources for mining of copper, lead, and silver, and they were shipping around 50,000 tons of ore a year. Swakopmund became central to the British consolidation of British South Africa. In 1916, an expedition of British soldiers commanded by General Botha landed there and advanced to Windhoek, the German capital, to support the troops which had been occupying Windhoek since the 12th of May a year prior. The entire German force of 204 officers and 3,293 men stationed at Windhoek surrendered to General Botha in what was seen as a vital victory in the region. However, retreating German soldiers had soured the victory in the Namib Desert by reportedly poisoning the drinking wells as they fled. The Germans claimed to have left signs on each of the wells they poisoned to warn those who came in the danger. The Union forces reported that many wells had been poisoned without any such warnings being provided. The British claimed to have found that bags filled with arsenic were being dropped into some wells, and in response, the German counterclaimed that they were actually bags of cooking salt. After World War I, Germany was devastated, and Swakopmund began to be referred to as a former German town. Yet the white natives who were living in this region remained mostly of German ethnicity. Okay. The mines are eating us. Be hard. Like many prominent American military and intelligence assets post-World War II, Peter Thiel was not born in the United States. Thiel was born on 11th of October 1967 in Frankfurt, Germany, to Klaus and Susan Thiel. The family moved to Cleveland in 1968, but soon after relocated again to apartheid South Africa, where Klaus Friedrich Thiel oversaw the development of uranium mines near Swakopmund, located in modern-day Namibia. By the time Peter Thiel's family relocated to the region, South Africa had already begun developing its clandestine nuclear program. To successfully create a nuclear weapon, the South African apartheid regime had to complete certain tasks. Firstly, it had to find or exploit a source of radioactive material. Secondly, it had to process those materials to make the radioactive material weapons grade. Thirdly, it had to use that weapons grade nuclear material to create a viable nuclear warhead which could be delivered via a missile. Apartheid South Africa made at least 7 nuclear weapons. The history of uranium is inextricably tied to Swakopmund and Namibia more generally. It was supposedly Captain Peter Low who first discovered uranium in the Namib Desert in 1928. However, the extraordinary size of the uranium deposits may not have been truly recognized until over 3 decades later. London's Weekly Dispatch on the 27th of October 1957 printed a short article entitled Big Uranium Find in Africa, with the piece stating, "Huge deposits of uranium have been found in the waterless Namib Desert in southwest Africa by Sir Ernest Oppenheimer's Anglo-American Corporation. The deposits are between 15 and 20 miles long and from a half a mile to a mile wide." Massive. The Rosing uranium mine was officially opened in 1976 and was located 50 kilometers away from the coast, bringing jobs and prosperity to the region. However, the mine was actually being developed in secret from at least the late 1950s. The official story of the mine's history is provided in the Namibian government document Uranium 2022 Resources, Production and Demand, which states, "With the upswing in the uranium market demands the prices, extensive uranium exploration started in Namibia in the late 1960s. Several airborne radiometric surveys were conducted and numerous anomalies were identified. In 1966, after rediscovering uranium occurrences, Rio Tinto acquired the rights to low-grade Rosing deposit, located 65 kilometers inland from the town of Swakopmund on the Atlantic Ocean. Trikopje, a near-surface calcrete deposit just north of Rosing, and Lange-Heinrich, another calcrete deposit situated 50 kilometers southeast of Rosing, were also discovered during this period. Mining commenced in 1976 at Rosing, and exploration intensifies as uranium prices increased sharply. The Rosing uranium mine discovery wasn't by accident. There was a big push to develop known uranium deposits during the 1960s. 5 years prior, the Soviet Union had tested the largest nuclear bomb in history, the Tsar Bomba, an explosion which has still never been matched. However, there was an even more pertinent reason for the Western powers to develop more sources of uranium in the late August of 1964. Soviet scientists, led by Dr. Dmitry Ivanovich Blokhintsev, who had built the first nuclear power plant in Obninsk, synthesized element number 104. It was described in the California newspaper, The Register, as the 12th radioactive element heavier than uranium created by man since 1940. The article goes on to say, the synthesis, he, Blokhintsev, said, was accomplished by hitting a plutonium target with accelerated ions of neon-22. If correct, this means that Soviet scientists had finally achieved a feat that had eluded the best efforts of, amongst others, the Lawrence Radiation Laboratory of the University of California at Berkeley, the world's leader in studies of elements heavier than uranium. Pretty important to mention that. In 1964, they're saying about how the University of California, Berkeley, is so important. It's a center. Soviet physicist Dmitry Ivanovich Blokhintsev, who died in 1979, was one of the initiators of the establishment of Joint Institute for Nuclear Research and its first director. Look at that hair over there with this guy. Ooh. Right. On the 7th of September 1966, Dr. Walter R. Hibbard Jr., the director of the U.S. Bureau of Mines, arranged a meeting with Wilfred E. Johnson of the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission and others to discuss the supply and demand of uranium. Klaus Thiel was assigned to the Rosing uranium mine while it was a key part of the South African nuclear weapons program. In his book about Thiel, The Contrarian, author Max Chafkin notes that the mine used black forced labor at the site. Chafkin also writes, Klaus earned his master's degree over the next 6 years, becoming a project manager who oversaw a team of engineers on mine projects. His specialty was the construction of open-pit mines, which involves excavating huge mounds of dirt and rock and then treating them chemically to extract minerals. The family moved frequently, and Klaus traveled even more, often spending weeks at a time on job sites far from home. Peter Thiel had spent his early childhood in Cleveland, but soon relocated to South Africa. The young Peter Thiel attended the elite white-only prep school in Johannesburg, followed by a German-language public school in Swakopmund itself. Swakopmund was a difficult place to live for many black people. The white community honored their German ethnicity during this time the Thiels were based there. The Guardian's Chris McGreal reported on this in 2025 in an article entitled How the Roots of the PayPal Mafia Extended to Apartheid South Africa, stating, at the time, Swakopmund was notorious for its continued glorification of Nazism, including celebrating Hitler's birthday. In 1976, the New York Times reported that some of the people in the town continued to greet each other with a Heil Hitler and to give the Nazi salute. Van Niekerk visited Swakopmund during South African rule. I was there in 1980s, and you could walk into a curio shop and buy mugs with Nazi swastikas on them. If you're German and you're in Swakopmund in the 1970s, which is when Thiel was there, you're part of that community, he said. Klaus Thiel was working on apartheid South Africa's nuclear weapons program. The West South African mine was central to the clandestine efforts to obtain a nuke. In fact, the Rosing mine itself was in direct contravention of the United Nations resolution. Some workers later gave evidence that the project Klaus was in charge of was so secretive that some of the workers weren't even told they were mining uranium. The whites and blacks had very different safety protocols at the Namibian mine. Chafkin describes some of this unethical disparity. Uranium mining is, by nature, risky. A report published after the end of apartheid by Namibia Support Committee, a pro-independence group, described conditions at the mine in grim terms, including an account of a contract laborer on the construction project, the project Klaus's company was helping to oversee, who said workers had not been told they were building a uranium mine and were thus unaware of the risks of radiation. The only clue they had been that white employers would hand out wages from behind glass, seemingly trying to avoid contamination themselves. The report mentioned workers dying like flies in 1976, while the mine was under construction. In the 2021 book, Monstrous Ontologies, Political Ethics, Materiality, author Katrina Nerta and Andrea Pavoni specifically drew on the anthropological fieldwork conducted in Swakopmund, now referred to as the Uranian capital of the world, and contrasted it with the works of Donna Haraway, Anand Singh, and H.P. Lovecraft. They described their paper as situating uranium as a god-like monster waiting in the desert for a time to arise. The authors investigated the monstrous effects of uranium on the people of Swakopmund and the workers of the Namibian mine. The papers state, indeed, to ingest uranium, known as internal exposure, would be to become monstrous through sickness, a process of becoming uranium, or at least the twisted byproduct of working in the industry. This was mirrored in the way that mining was sometimes described to me as a commonality across linguistics. Imina oda nitatuli, Oshawabo language. Mukodi orikudidia in Shona, or Libulu aliaka nuzota nagnya in Linga, all translating as the mines are eating us. Whilst these phrases also refer to the economic exploitation that was often associated with mines, and are specifically as a specific neither to Swakopmund nor indeed Africa, in situ, they vividly describe a particular effect of radiation on the body, the effect of being eaten alive, with the body weakened and slowly destroyed by seemingly invisible forces over a long period of time. Uranium had monstrous consequences, and people like Klaus Thiel knew the effects exposure to radioactive material has on the human body. Thiel's involvement was during the very early development of the Rosing mine, while it was still classified as South African. Rosing Uranium Limited was formed in 1970 to develop the Rosing uranium deposit. Rio Tinto Zinc was the leading shareholder with 51.3% of the equity when the company was formed and subsequently increasing its stake to 69%. In 1978, the Rosing Foundation was founded, which a 2016 OECD document says was established to focus on education, healthcare, environmental management, and radiation safety in the uranium industry. However, radiation safety was not something which was implemented for black slaves who were forced to labor in the uranium mines before 1978. Evidence shows significant activity at Rosing uranium deposit from at least 1957, meaning that for over 2 decades, no significant safety measures were put in place for black mine workers. This is the footprint of the Rosing uranium mine, showing disturbed areas of the open pit, SJ pit, West rock dumps, processing plant, tailing storage facility, the receptor locations at Arandis Airport, and the Old Cairn mine are also indicated. So it shows, you can see the mine. I mean, uranium is from meteors hitting the earth, and you can see how that meteors hit the earth, ended up around here, but it has gone in a long line. So that was a massive length and only a mile across in the biggest place. Oh man, God. Tens of thousands of mine workers would have been exposed to deadly levels of uranium, and they would have brought the radioactive material back to their families and their communities. The effect of exposure to radiation from uranium mining was already well known. In an article from 1966 entitled Hazard Scene, Washington's Associated Press reported that 70,000 Army wrist compasses were to be destroyed because luminous dials gave off dangerous radioactive gas. Within the article, it states officials said radon gas had been a problem in uranium mines where the poorly ventilated areas, miners inhaling the poisonous substance, have over the years contracted lung cancer. The actual number of people who were injured or died as a result of exposure from radiation from the Rosing mine is unknown. I gotta be honest. When you think about it and you think that how quickly many of them would have died and how many people would have died back at their homes as well, it's likely that they went through a lot of workers and kept shipping more workers in. This is a genocide by uranium. This is one of the most evil things I've ever researched. I've researched some evil shit. The nuke and country. By 1976, it was being reported that the uranium being mined near Swakopmund was being used by the British nuclear deterrence program. In an article entitled Namibia Sawdust Kaiser, journalist Neil Akerson writes, Namibia is one of the mining centers of the world. The Canadians mined copper at Tsumeb. Anglo-Americans shoveled diamonds from the dunes along the Skeleton Coast. And in the desert north of Swakopmund, Rio Tinto Zinc is digging the uranium which loads the British nuclear deterrent. More than diamonds, it is a great uranium mine at Roysing which gives the Foreign Office and State Department doubt about their interest in total independence of Namibia. It was clear the British were heavily involved in the uranium mining which surrounded Swakopmund during this period. In another article, Akerson dated 25th of January 1979, the author states, as the evening comes on, feral shrieks rise among the palms as English and Scottish engineers from the uranium mine at Rosing stagger from bar to bar. For fish suppers, they clutch fresh pilchards and chips done up in Namib times. The Germans loathe them. By March 1980, Britain's involvement in the Namibia uranium mining was exposed. A Daily Mirror article by Ronald Ricketts entitled How UN Atom Bomb is Beaten explained Britain buys vast quantities of uranium from Namibia despite a United Nations ban. It was revealed last night. The UN ruled 5 years ago that the removal of the African country's mineral resources should be outlawed. But Britain buys £500,000 worth of Namibian uranium a week from a mine partly owned by British-based Rio Tinto Zinc. It was claimed on ITV's World in Action. Labour MP Tony Benn said that civil servants kept the deal secret when he was technology minister. When the secrets came out, the government eventually gave its approval, but Mr. Benn thought he was wrong not to fight it. RTZ chief executive Alistair Frame said later the deal was legal. In the same month, the Daily Express produced a piece by John Ellison which said, "It's called rosing. A rose pink hole, a mile long and nearly 1,000 feet deep in the baking raw granite rock of the Namib Desert. Day and night, 7 days a week, giant excavators claw at its terraces. 3,000 men, marshaled by British engineers, work in shifts through the 100-degree heat to ensure that Roysing, a huge processing plant fed on crushed granite, never stops. A uranium mine, the biggest in the Western world. It produces each year 5,000 tons of U-308, a grey powder which fuels the nuclear power stations of Britain, France, and Germany. In energy terms, Roysing is a mini oil state. Its uranium is equal to about 500 million barrels of oil, 2/3 of our total yearly consumption." Swakopmund was just a few hundred miles north of the infamous offshore diamond fishing concession, which was owned by and controlled by the De Beers subsidiary called Consolidated Diamond Mining. South African gold mines had become close to unprofitable at the close of 1960s. The fixed price on gold during this period at $35 an ounce, and companies were prospecting for other potential commodities with a better market value. During the peak of the nuclear arms race, uranium prices were rising. As future technocracy began to be created, the importance of developing nuclear power stations became beneficial in various ways, especially economically speaking. In an article for the Daily Telegraph entitled "South Africa's Rich Successor to Gold," journalist Ray Kennedy writes, "World demands for electricity is expected to rise to 1,080,000 megawatts by 1980, an increase of 1,000% over the 1950 figure. Nuclear power stations will provide a high proportion of this extra power. South African government is therefore particularly interested in the discovery in United Nations contested Southwest Africa of a massive uranium prospect. It has come about for such is South Africa's luck in this sphere through diamond drilling operations at Roysing near Swakopmund on the South African coast." The South African Minister for Mines and Planning at the time, Dr. Carol de Wet, confirmed that there were extensive low-grade uranium deposits discovered which could be mined by the relatively low-cost open-pit method. Of course, de Wet wasn't telling the press the entire story. The South African regime had already developed a uranium mine, and the country was heading towards becoming a nuclear power. South Africa was not acting alone during this period. The rise of nuclear technology is inextricably linked to both the rise of globalism and the rise of the technocracy. The fact that South Africa became central to the British nuclear program during this period could be viewed as either ironic or contrived. South Africa had been the birthplace of Cecil Rhodes' Round Table movement, and a proud vassal of the Fabian-filled British establishment. Regardless, that is what happened. Atomic Schwab. By 1966, Klaus Schwab had been noted by the American media as studying in the U.S., as the Fort Worth Star Telegram reported in July of that year. A young German scholar, Dr. Klaus Schwab, visited here recently. He has been traveling through the United States before doing graduate work in the fall at Harvard. Dr. Schwab's father is a customer of Texas Refinery Corp, headquartered here, and a TRC representative in Germany told Dr. Schwab he really wouldn't be seeing America unless he went to Texas. So Dr. Schwab did. While here, he fell into company of such TRC people as Drake Bentall and Roy Tavender. Schwab traveled to Texas by bus from New York, with a newspaper article remarking on his ability to spark up conversation during the journey. However, the article didn't mention that Klaus Schwab was actually in America to attend a CIA-funded program based in Harvard, which was run by Henry Kissinger himself. The following year, both the New York Times and Ramparts magazine exposed Kissinger's international seminar as funded by known conduits of the CIA, including from Kermit Roosevelt's American friends in the Middle East. Klaus Schwab was already a German Rotary Foundation Fellow in 1966 and was invited to the Hotel Don to speak before the Richmond Rotary Club in August of that year. An article for California paper called The Independent also mentions that Schwab had been studying at UC Berkeley for 6 weeks before he returned to Harvard. There were several famous nuclear physicists associated with University of California, Berkeley during the 1960s. The inventor of the cyclotron and the founder of Radiation Laboratory, Ernest O. Lawrence, may have passed away almost a decade before, but he had built a strong legacy for the study of radiation at the campus. During Schwab's visit, Edwin M. Macmillan, who shared a Nobel Prize with Glenn Seaborg in 1958 for discoveries in transuranium elements, was serving as director of the Lawrence Radiation Laboratory from 1958 to 1973. His partner in crime, Glenn T. Seaborg, had served as the chancellor of UC Berkeley from 1958 to 1961 and was also deeply involved in research on transuranium elements. Emilio Segre was another Nobel Prize winner who was focused on nuclear and particle physics. Another Nobel laureate, Luis W. Alvarez, was also at Berkeley during the 1960s and also focused on nuclear and particle physics, specializing in the use of bubble chambers to study subatomic particles. Schwab would have arrived at Berkeley just in time to meet Thomas Bohr, the grandson of Niels Bohr. The Bohr family had spent the summer at Berkeley, and the university was treating them like nuclear royalty. Niels Bohr's contributions were vital to the scientists in Los Alamos who had developed the first atomic bomb. Klaus Schwab would have also enjoyed the Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory Museum at the time, which was exhibiting the bomb casing of Little Boy, described in the Santa Fe, New Mexico on the 25th of August 1966 as a gun-type uranium weapon of the kind detonated over Hiroshima. That's me on the Greatest Reset, talking about Schwab's family history. Schwab was being awarded accolade after accolade during this period of his life. He worked as a consultant for both Bonn's Federal Ministry of Economics and as a representative of the German machine builders. The latter article also mentioned Schwab's father, Eugen Schwab. His father is the immediate past president of the Rotary Club of Friedrichshafen near the Alps. Like his father, Klaus Schwab took his Rotary Club fellowship role very seriously, and the Rotary Club have serious questions to answer. The CIA-funded training program which Klaus Schwab was attending at Harvard had various reported funding streams. An article in the Morning Union paper from the 22nd of May 1967 reveals that the Rotary Club was also involved in the Kissinger-led CIA program. An industrial consultant from Germany will speak at the weekly meeting of the Westfield Rotary Club today at 12:15 p.m. at Tonelli's. Klaus M. Schwab, studying at Harvard Business School on a Rotary Foundation fellowship, will discuss the international work of the Rotary Club. The Rotary Club had hosted talks from previous members who have also been high-ranking CIA officials, such as CIA Director William H. Webster at Phoenix Rotary Club in January 1988 and Lieutenant General Vernon A. Waters in 1975, who was CIA Deputy Director at the time. The CIA FOIA notes Lieutenant General Walters' comments to a joint meeting of Rotary Kiwanis Club in Columbus, stating, CIA, he said, is the eye of the giant. The eye which, if blinded by needless probing into top secrets by outside agencies, will frighten our allies and please leaders of countries who don't wish us well. General Walters, who speaks 8 languages and has been an advisor to many presidents and ambassadors in his 34 years of service, pointed out that many people think of the CIA as an instrument of war. He calls the agency a weapon of peace because the CIA's monitoring capabilities. We have been able to reach an agreement with USSR on intercontinental ballistic missiles, he said, and expressed optimism for the future of international relations, especially with Brazil, which he calls a rising superpower. General Walters quoted the CIA's motto, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Klaus Schwab went on a mini tour of the Rotary clubs while in the States, including delivering a talk to American Rotary Club members in Massachusetts in 1967. The meeting was reported in the Springfield Union in an article entitled Nazism Rise, Said Miner in Germany, which stated, expected to finish his studies here next month. Schwab said he will spend a month in Washington before returning home to Germany in July. He said the past year spent in the country will have a great influence on my future activities and on my life. The article also mentions again that Klaus Schwab had been awarded a Rotary Foundation Fellowship to attend Harvard for the 1966-1967 academic year. The month before the previous article was released, the New York Times revealed that the course Schwab was attending during this period was CIA funded. From 1968 onwards, Klaus Schwab was recruited by his father's model Nazi company to head a merger and illegally sell nuclear weapons technology to South African apartheid regime. In the same year, Peter Thiel was also heading to South Africa after he finished his travels with Ufinger and moved to his fledgling family unit to Swakopmund. Klaus Schwab attended Kissinger's international seminar at Harvard between 1965 and 1967. Kissinger's seminar was the precursor to the World Economic Forum for Young Global Leaders. These programs were originally designed to train potential leadership candidates who could later be installed into positions of power after CIA-supported coups, color revolutions, or within companies with an interest in the deep state. Kissinger was central to America's nuclear endeavors. After writing Nuclear Weapons and Foreign Policy in 1957, Kissinger became the go-to political mover for anything related to the proliferation of nuclear technology. The other big name in nuclear theory during this period was the Hudson Institute's Herman Kahn, often described as the real Dr. Strangelove. Kahn conceived of the notion of mutually assured destruction in 1961, and these men became two of Schwab's mentors. In fact, on Klaus Schwab's return to Germany after Kissinger's course, he was sent back to both Herman Kahn and famed economist John Kenneth Galbraith to set up the World Economic Forum initially called the European Management Forum. However, on Klaus Schwab's return in 1967, Peter Schmidheiny asked him to help with restructuring of Schwab's father's old company, Escher Weiss, which had been central to the Nazi nuclear weapons program during World War II. They didn't only design the casing for a potential atomic bomb, they also created the massive turbines which were used for creating weapons-grade nuclear materials. Escher Weiss had garnered a negative name for itself after helping the Nazi regime. In the late 60s, the company was merging with a company called Schulze AG, with the company temporarily called Schulze Escher Weiss. Klaus Schwab turned Schulze Escher Weiss into a modern technological corporation, which would design significant parts of our high-tech future. As I reported in Schwab's Family Value, Escher Weiss pioneered some of the most important technologies in power generation. As the US Department of Energy points out in their paper on supercritical CO2 Brayton cycle development, CBC, a device used in hydro and nuclear power plants, Escher Weiss was the first company known to develop the turbo machinery for CBC systems starting in 1939. Going on to state that 24 systems were built with Escher Weiss's designing the power conversion cycles, building, and turbo machinery for all but free. There you can read Schwab Family Values. That will also be up on Substack soon. By 1966, just before Klaus Schwab began to work for Escher Weiss, the Escher Weiss helium compressor designed for the Lafleur Corporation continued the evolution of the Brayton cycle development. This technology was still in importance to the arms industry by 1986, with nuclear-powered drones being equipped with a helium-cooled Brayton cycle nuclear reactor. Escher Weiss had been involved with manufacturing and installing nuclear technology at least as early as 1962, as shown by this patent, which I've included a link to, for a heat exchange arrangement for a nuclear power plant, and this patent, which I've linked to, from 1966 for a nuclear reactor gas turbine plant with emergency cooling. After Schwab left Schulze Escher Weiss, Schulze also helped to develop special turbo compressors for uranium enrichment to yield reactor fuels. When Klaus Schwab joined Schulze Escher Weiss in 1967 and started the reorganization of the company to be a technological corporation or technology corporation, the involvement of Schulze Escher Weiss in the darker aspects of the global nuclear arms race became immediately more pronounced. Before Klaus became involved, Escher Weiss had often concentrated on helping design and build parts for civilian use of nuclear technology, e.g. nuclear power generation, yet the arrival of the eager Mr. Schwab coincided with the company's participation in the illegal proliferation of nuclear weapons technology. By 1969, the incorporation of Escher Weiss into Schulze was completed, and the merged companies were rebranded Schulze AG, dropping the historic Escher Weiss from their name. It was eventually revealed, thanks to the review and report carried out by the Swiss authorities and a man named Peter Hug, that Schulze Escher Weiss began secretly procuring and building key parts for nuclear weapons during the 1960s. While Schwab was on the board, the company also played a critical role in the development of South Africa's illegal nuclear weapons program. During the darkest years of apartheid regime, Klaus Schwab was a leading figure in the founding of a company culture which helped Pretoria build 6 nuclear weapons and partially assemble a 7th. There's a read through there for you if you don't want to read the article. Schwab Family Values. In the report, Peter Hug outlined how Schulze Escher Weiss AG, referred to a post-merger just Schulze AG, had supplied vital components to the South African government and found evidence of Germany's role in supporting the racist regime, also revealing that the Swiss government was aware of illegal deals but tolerated them in silence while supporting some of them actively or criticizing them only half-heartedly. Hugg's report was eventually finalized in work entitled Switzerland and South Africa, 1948 to 1994. Final report of the NFP 42 Plus, commissioned by the Swiss Federal Council, which was compiled and written by George Chris and published in 2007. By 1967, South Africa had constructed a reactor as part of a plan to produce plutonium. The Safari 2, located at Pelindaba, Safari 2 was part of a project to develop a reactor moderated by heavy water, which was fueled by natural uranium and cooled using sodium. These links to developing heavy water for the creation of uranium, the same technology which the Nazis had utilized, also with the help of Escher Weiss, may explain why South Africans initially got Escher Weiss involved. By 1969, South Africa abandoned the heavy water reactor project at Pelindaba because it was draining resources from their uranium enrichment project that had first begun in 1967. Okay, go. Nuclear apartheid. The Thiel family only left Swakopmund in 1977, briefly returning to Cleveland before settling in California. Klaus Schwab and Peter Thiel are similar in many ways. They are both progeny of engineers who used slave labor to further a nuclear weapons program and genocidal regimes. Schwab and Thiel are also responsible for designing and implementing major parts of the technocracy which is springing up around us. Schwab has done this through the World Economic Forum, and Peter Thiel via Palantir, Thiel Capital, Thiel's Founders Fund, Mithril Capital, and many other tentacles. There is also another similarity. Peter Thiel was taken under the wing of Irving Kristol and the neoconservative elite, and Klaus Schwab was taken under the wing of Henry Kissinger and others at Harvard. There you go. That came from a new mythology. It's from a book. It says Rex, Guinevere, John Ransom, Klaus Thiel, and Jack Thompson at mine opening reception. So that looks like that's the Klaus Thiel we're looking for there. That is Peter Thiel's father. So, in 1967, the Mockingbird media began to reveal the many CIA programs running out of Harvard University. The Six-Day War had changed the CIA's focus considerably. Israel now had the full backing of the United States military and intelligence establishments. There was an opportunity for a proverbial reset, and the American elite grasped the opportunity. Harvard University's deep ties to both the American political establishment and its intelligence apparatus became so exposed during this period that they had to withdraw from such surreptitious activities temporarily. Instead, they handed these activities on to a new group of illicit actors, the neoconservatives. William F. Buckley was interviewed by Esquire magazine in January 1961, where he said, "I would rather be governed by the first 2,000 people in telephone directory," he said, "than by Harvard University faculty." Only 6 years passed before New York Times and Ramparts magazine revealed the CIA's funding of Kissinger's international seminar. Television programs such as In the Pay of the CIA revealed that Gloria Steinem had run her CIA-funded youth propaganda operation out of Harvard. And it was revealed to the people of America that Harvard intellectuals had become entangled with the creation of an overreaching deep state intelligence panopticon. Wars like Vietnam were simultaneously turning public sentiment against the ideology of Kissinger et al. In response to failing public sentiment, the prestigious Ivy League university handed the baton of state censorship, propaganda, and control over to the likes of Irving Kristol and his fledgling political ideology. Neoconservatism had facets straight out of Trotsky's playbook, an ideology which manufactured a state of permanent revolution wherever it was implemented. Henry Kissinger and his counterparts were the old iteration of the post-World War II deep state. Irving Kristol and the neoconservatives were the new guard. As I explained in the article, Dr. Klaus Schwab, or the CFR, taught me to stop worrying and love the bomb. Klaus Schwab was trained by Henry Kissinger himself, who CIA funded Kissinger's international seminar at Harvard. On graduating from Kissinger's international seminar, Schwab returned to Europe with the grandfather of nuclear theory, Herman Kahn, and the famed American economist J.K. Galbraith as mentor. There, Schwab and his new American friends formed the original iteration of the World Economic Forum and began the march towards technocracy we now see developing around us. While the neoconservatives began creating non-governmental organizations and think tanks targeting the Soviet Union, the old guard began preparing the ground for the new generation. Central to this new era of next-generation warfare was the controlled proliferation of nuclear weapons. In 2019, Rio Tinto sold its 69% share of the Rossing to the China National Uranium Corporation, a wholly owned subsidiary of the government-owned China National Nuclear Corporation. The Rossing mine is scheduled to close at the end of 2026. It should be no surprise that the responsibility for creating illegal, illicit, or secretive nuclear weapons programs has been handed down from father to son. There is only a small group of technocrats who can construct the technocratic panopticon, and they only have a tiny pool of elites to choose from. If you want to understand the reason for our current issue, ask yourself this. If you were to let the sons of evil, genocidal maniacs reform our society in their image, then what would our new society look like? Now, turn on the news, and I think you'll have your answer. Listen, I gotta say that was a journey that evokes mass. That was a hard one to write, a real hard one to write. It was really sad. I get into researching about the people at the time, and that was genocide. It was pretty heavy. Thanks for being with me on it. I need your help and support to do this. As you see underneath this Substack version, you've got Eric Weinstein's Great Replacement. You've got some support page. You can join my Patreon. SpaceX Offenders, of course, and the Non-Governmental Octopus. You can read any of those on my Substack or Newspaste. You buy me a coffee. Man, I need your help. So please help support it. Support this work. It's pretty hard to get through some of this. Right. I got to be honest. That was it was not a nice process to have to go through. But something very important comes out of it. It's the same people. It's the same families. They're like, it's like, you say it's like a virus that lives forever inside the minds of men who come from the same line of that virus. And it's a virus of hatred, of narcissism, not caring, of putting profits before people, of the world that we see all around us. When I started to research Klaus Thiel and discovered that, wait a minute, he was in South Africa at the same time, also working on the apartheid South African regime's illegal nuclear weapons program. Well, that made a hell of a lot more sense, to be honest. Why wouldn't he? Klaus Schwab's over there. Peter Thiel's father's over there. Eventually, Peter Thiel will do something awful. He'll go on to do something awful. What does he do? Oh, he goes on to do something awful. Create the digital panopticon that can watch us all. By threatening us all. They threaten us all with nukes. Make us all... This is part of the thing about mutually assured destruction. They threaten us all with nukes. They make us all afraid all of the time. And we hand over our consent to them straight away. They're murderers. Dirty, fascist, murdering bastards. Provably. Father, son, all of them. Murderous, fascist bastards. Eugene Schwab, Klaus Schwab. Both murdering, fascist bastards. Eugene Schwab would help the Nazis trying to gain the atomic bomb. Klaus Schwab would help the apartheid South African regime try to gain the nuclear bomb. Klaus Thiel would help the apartheid South Africans create the nuclear bomb. Peter Thiel helps the technocratic intelligence agencies new digital panopticon form. Obviously, the PayPal mafia is a CIA mafia. They knew what was coming, and they now got all of the operations. The people who come from that, that's just American intelligence purchasing people who were bought aboard, who don't really care about America at all. They're bloody globalists. Elon Musk and Peter Thiel. What worlds are you in to think that they represent America? Oh, America, we come over here. Yeah, they sailed over and they went past Statue of Liberty. Yeah, and they were like, oh, we're now Americans. No. Still, the Germans won. The Germans won. One thing that was interesting about researching Swakopmund is that the Germans got forced out during World War II, but they couldn't get rid of them. Once the war ended, all the Germans went back to their homes. Germany owned the place. It was German in ethnicity. They used the people as slave labor. The British, they were owning parts of South Africa. They were doing the same. They ended up taking over the Roysing mine. Most of the not only the British company was running the Roysing mine, but it was going towards nuclear deterrence. The actual British nuclear deterrence was fueled by the Roysing mine. Well, of course it was. They're all on the same side. There is no difference between Klaus Schwab and Peter Thiel. There's no difference between Klaus Thiel and Eugene Schwab. No difference. When I wanted to prove that there was people would always say, oh, family lines. Oh, they must be related to kings or queens or black nobility or whatever. It doesn't make no difference. It's something else. Something else I cannot describe. I don't know if you can. But so the manipulators, the key manipulators, and maybe like father, like son with thieves, maybe like father, like son with arrogance, maybe like father, like son with. But there's certain traits, there's certain genetics where it really repeats, and it's amazing. You can't just. There's no coincidence that father and son both work for intelligence, both work for the state. That's how intelligence works. They can trust that person genetically is predisposed to not only following in his father's footsteps, but also working with intelligence. Genetically predisposed. They're genetically predisposed to sell us all out. And what happened in South Africa, well, you're talking like, if you only talk between the time that Peter Thiel's there, they got up to 3,000 men working on the pits, black slaves, dying. In a few years after it started, they would have had to have almost a complete different people working there because the majority of them would have died. And the next generation would have died. And at the same time, the people in charge of the country wanted black people to die and wanted to genocide black people. So what was the Swakopmund mine? What was it? It was a fucking death camp. They marched black people into the mine, often with zero protection, to ingest uranium and be eaten alive by the mines. To go home and for their family to ingest uranium and to be eaten alive by the mines. For their babies, for their kids, for their unborn babies to die. For at least 10 years while Peter Thiel's father is head of that mine. Heading up doing... these guys... They're not the heroes. And where was at the same time that Hug report was happening, that it was being revealed in Switzerland that they had supplied a racist apartheid regime illegally with nuclear weapons technology, and all this evidence was coming out. It was the same time as South Africa was using a tool. They're using a tool. Everything could be forgiven. Everything could be forgiven. So fine. Oh, Nelson Mandela. That's it. Wipe your mind. Oh, look, we got a Jesus character we bring on. I don't care how good or bad Nelson Mandela is. I don't care. As a human, I don't care. Nothing was done. No accountability. They were able to murder loads of black people. And Nelson, did Nelson Mandela call for it to be out? No. Black Jesus. Forgive them. I'm Nelson Mandela. You're all forgiven. There you go. Genocide a load of people. We won't even look into it properly. We'll have a couple of people mention it. You know, the way it's mentioned later on in other articles and books, it's quite flippant. It's like, oh, yeah, you know, they knew they were working on the mine and they were dying. Nobody recognize what that means? If black miners, up to about 3,000 of them, were working on the mine, and the majority of them are going to die because of that, and it's over a 10-year period, so they're not all going to be working there and then go away and die at the end. They're going to die. Some of them are going to die really quick. And the mines were eating them. They'll catch illnesses, diseases, won't be able to work anymore. Then the kids have got to go into the mines. That's a focused genocide. There's never really been. They had a reset. They had a reset. They had a Klaus Schwab like great reset in South Africa, didn't they? Oh, Nelson Mandela. And so no one's been held accountable. And the person who should be held accountable would be definitely Peter Thiel's father, Klaus Thiel, for working illegally on the South African atomic bomb program, nuclear bomb program. Peter Thiel brought up in a town full of Nazis, genociding black people. Let's get him. Let's put him in charge of the digital panopticon. Hey! I'm looking for someone to be put in charge of security of everything, of a whole new world, a whole new agenda. Who are we going to choose? The Nazi over there whose dad helped genocide black people. That's the world we're living in. It's honestly one of the hardest articles I've had to write. One of the saddest. I even reading it still chokes me up because I read other things. You know, what goes in the article is just a little bit. I had to read a load of different things. I had to take in a load of understanding what people went through. And it wasn't just the one genocide, you know. The Nama and Herero genocide was at the beginning. It was the first genocide of the 20th century. And then later on, this other genocide isn't even recognized. The Roysing genocide, the Swakopmund genocide, not properly recognized. Why? Well, you know what I'm going to say? Oh, Nelson Mandela. My friends, don't let them bring in a hero and make you forget. That's why we make the same mistakes over and over again. That's why we leave the same people in charge. They're really good at doing it. Later on, 2002? Nelson Mandela sitting there with Jeffrey Epstein. Ghislaine Maxwell, they're having a nice meal together. Nelson Mandela. It's all a bunch of balls. Unless we hold people accountable for what they do, nothing really matters. I'm sorry if I don't know how long that was. I lost a bit of track of time there. And I hope you don't mind me singing Nelson Mandela at you constantly. I do need your help. I said buy me a coffee. Listen, come to Newspace. Join Substack. You know, support me on Substack. If you support me all supporters on Substack and Patreon are helping me out massively. I'm not sure how much I can express that. It's just like $8 a month, just life changing in many different ways, because people don't pay. They don't pay. This work don't pay. I'm hoping that opportunities come up, things come up. I'm hoping that I can write a book or two in this time. You know, maybe I can get some interest, but it's hard to get people to be interested when it's so bloody censored all the time. When my name can't even be mentioned without some of these people making me disappear. So anyway, thank you anyway. Thank you for being with me. Sorry if I feel exasperated and depressed. That was a bit of a hard one, but this has been a Johnny Vedmore read through with me, Johnny Vedmore. And I just want to say one last thing. Bye.
Young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina, and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets.